Okay.
Okay, so we'll start with just some housekeeping for our call. This is our Project Pain Free Community Tennis, Project Pain Free Tennis Community Call number 2. So we just start with a little bit of housekeeping, and we first want to welcome you and thank you for being here, and always want to recognize that 60 minutes of your time can be spent any way that you want, and to spend it with us. We appreciate that and we don't take it lightly. So thank you for being with us to discuss tennis and everything related around how to be pain-free in our tennis playing. We are recording these calls, and so we want to make sure that you know that. We record the calls so that we can share with our communities the possibility for building strong, healthy, robust tennis communities that are not in pain. So all of us know or are people who have dealt with injuries and chronic tension patterns and pain. And when we can't play the sports that we love, it diminishes our communities. And so we're trying to spread the word about the possibilities of how we can play pain-free for as long as possible and build robust communities around the world. So we are recording that in order to spread the word across our social media platforms. That being said, if you don't feel comfortable having your likeness or your voice put in public on these recordings, then just please feel free to put your contribution in the chat and we will address those that way. That way, if for some reason you don't want to participate in the publicity of this, then that would be the way to go. And we do highly encourage you to share your cameras on, and we are building a community. And so part of community is that humans love to see other humans' faces. We get a lot of visual information. The faces are beautiful. The expressions and gestures are wonderful. So we love to see that. It makes us feel like we're not in a vacuum of the black hole of cyberspace. So if you can share your videos, that would be wonderful. And then make sure that your mics are muted if someone else is talking, and make sure and unmute your mic if you'd like to talk. And with that being said, the format of the call today is going to be, we're going to focus on plantar fasciitis a bit. Nick's going to start talking about that, give us an intro, and then we'll talk about plantar fasciitis some, and then we'll interrupt that with a discussion and question and answer period, and then we'll go into the tennis elbow, and we'll do the same format there. So we'll have some participation there. We'll start with some icebreaker questions. So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. I think just to reiterate the video on camera stuff, like I think there's like real power in not only like seeing like other people's bodies, because I think we can learn from each other, and we're all different. We all have unique sort of anatomy. And so a lot of times, like, you know, the way that my foot is shaped is going to be different than your foot. And so all of our body parts are different. So we can really learn from each other. So if obviously if you have the capacity and you're in the environment where you can turn on the camera, and that would be great. And also it allows us to sort of better sort of maybe pinpoint some stuff that might be going on that we see that maybe you might not be aware of. So it could help us sort of like address some of your issues in a little bit better way. So with that said, yeah, we'll just start with we'll go around the room and just kind of share why you're here, really, like what is it you're struggling with, one of those two issues, whether it's plantar fasciitis or tennis elbow, and what you love about tennis and why you play. So Ruth, you want to start us off?
Yes. Okay, so the question I'm answering is, it's funny, I asked the question, but I didn't actually answer it for myself, which is, what is the most important thing I get from playing tennis? And that is, in one sentence, I get physical feedback about my movement prowess, that I want to be a good mover, and tennis is a beautiful way for me to learn about that. And I learn a lot about myself and the world around me. And I have dealt with both plantar fasciitis and tennis elbow, and have resolved both of those on a number of occasions, and it goes away and it comes back, and I know how to deal with it now for my body.
Sweet. Yeah, so for me, I mean, to me, I love the physical challenge of tennis, and then also the mental sort of growth that it fosters, just being in situations that are difficult and having a problem solve. So it's a beautiful multi-layered game that I just plan to play for the next 30 or 40 years. And I've dealt with, yeah, I mean, I'm currently dealing with a little Achilles tendonitis, tendinopathy. So I have some foot stuff going on. I've had plantar fasciitis, and I did have tennis elbow. So these are all things that, I've been able to sort of deal with. And as Ruth said, I think they come back, but now I have a better grasp on how to sort of deal with it based on what the stuff we're going to be talking about today. So I'll pass it on to Orne.
Orne, you said? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, luckily, I don't have any issues, like really problems in my physical body right now that I can feel. I have other problems, but I've been playing tennis a lot lately, especially the last years. And like one of the things I've been having, it's kind of like a pain here that I knew it was coming also from my neck too, and like my back. So I've started to do more like also functional activities, so I could build more strength, and that could help me in my tennis. But I'm interested in learning, and that's why I'm here actually right now. I don't have any specific problem that I that brought me here today, but just wanted to listen to you guys. Thank you. Actually, thank you for doing this.
Pleasure.
Want me to go?
Sure.
I love tennis. I started playing maybe a year and a half ago with my daughter. I mean, I've been playing all my life, but I kind of rekindled my love for it about a year and a half ago. Actually played with Heather quite a bit. And man, I love the competitiveness of it and the community of it, and combined with the fitness components and the improvement in skill, it's just a super fun way to get exercise and hang out with people. And for me, it was hanging out with my daughter. And I got plantar fasciitis from playing, and it was yeah. And so I haven't been able to play in probably 6 months as a result, and have been struggling with trying to figure out how to get it to go away.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, Heather, go ahead.
Great. Well, Martin, that explains where you have been. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have plantar fasciitis, but everybody has foot pain as you get older. And I've heard a lot about walking barefoot, the advantages of it versus walking with shoes. And so I'm curious to see what you guys are going to say about, how those help and different ways to treat, pain. I mean, I think I've had something, and everybody's had something in the past where, you strain something. So I think all these are just really helpful and informational for not just treatment, but also prevention.
Great point.
Yeah, you're in the right place. We'll definitely get into barefoot training, walking, because that is a really powerful way to sort of restore health in your foot. But we have to kind of do it in a smart, systematic way, because if your foot is used to wearing shoes for decades and multiple decades, you might not have the capacity to spend time barefoot, and it could lead to injury. I know for myself, when the minimal shoes and those Vibram 5-finger shoes came out like 10 years ago, I put a pair on. I went for like a 3-mile jog, and I completely strained my calf because I didn't have the capacity in my body. So it's definitely, we'll talk about that when we get into some of the specifics of plantar fasciitis and foot mechanics. So awesome. Okay.
I was just going to say something really quick, Nick, that you brought up in our last community call, which I think is worth noting, is that we love to play tennis. Those of us that are here, and we want the restoration of our foot health and our whole body health to be as playful as it possibly can be. So I think just as if we're playing tennis and we're athletic, or we are like human, we have a tendency to want to work towards like better health. And we know from our experience that when we make small, consistent, playful habits every single day, as playful as possible, meaning that you don't dread, doing your strength work or whatever, that there is a tendency to stick with a small, tiny habit every single day that leads to consistent long-term benefits. And so we're really going to focus on that part. Like, is it not terrible to do it? Is it kind of fun? Is it joyful and playful? Possibly. And then is it sustainable over the long term, a long-term mindset?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. So yeah, let's dive in. So we'll talk just really quickly, high level around sort of acute injuries, and then I'll dive into some plantar fasciitis specifics. Maybe I'll do a little demo on the foot, and maybe you guys can kind of do a little play along, because I do think the power of being on these live calls is to do some of this stuff together, and so you can sort of feel what it feels like, and you can take a look at your own specific sort of shape of your foot and your toes and your sort of basic functionality. But like at a really high level, playing tennis or any sport for that matter could cause a lot of repetitive use injuries, right? We're not really evolutionarily designed to do all these moves that is required from tennis. So we have to take that sort of high level sort of viewpoint that if our body doesn't have full capacity in all of its ranges of motion, when we go to play tennis or any sport, it could lead to some overuse injuries and some sort of overloading of tissues, because certain areas around that joint might not have the capacity that it should have. And this could be from shoes or sitting or whatever old injuries we might have. So I think taking that lens and then approaching injuries from that perspective, and really the way that we look at sort of injuries is there's a short-term sort of acute phase where you have pain and irritation in that tissue. So let's take plantar fasciitis. So the bottom of your foot is really sensitive. It's very painful. So the first step is sort of addressing that sort of pain sensation. And so, what we like to use there is sort of a combination of like minimal rest, compression, so sort of compress the tissue and then elevate. So really the first phase of like an injury, we want to try to protect it as much as possible. And then we want to try to just foster like the getting nutrients in and getting the garbage out of the tissue, right? And so that requires sort of elevating, especially the foot above your heart, so you can let some of that damaged tissue clear out. That's where compression comes in to sort of, allow some of those sort of tissues to come back in, the nutrients from the blood. And so really like the first phase is just trying to just protect the area of your body from further insult, right? And so I think the old wisdom was immobilize, don't move, maybe put a brace on and try to really like lock the tissue down. But what we're learning is that you really want to move. The more movement you can get in or around the area, the more that's going to facilitate that blood flow. So that's going to bring the nutrients in, and it's going to allow that sort of garbage cleanup, like those damaged tissues, to be circulated out. So, icing is one thing that we hear a lot, I get a lot of questions on, and icing can feel good and it does alleviate pain, but icing definitely is going to slow down that inflammatory process, which is what is bringing in a lot of that cleanup, cellular action, and removing a lot of that damaged tissue. So we have to be mindful around icing. Is there anything else you want to address on that, Ruth, before we get into specifics on the foot?
That covers it, I think.
Okay. So when we're talking about plantar fasciitis, I think it's important to understand the sort of how the plantar fascia is sort of is laid out on the bottom of the foot, and it connects in the heel bone, and then it splays out to all 5 of your toes. So a lot of times if you have shoes, and I shot a video on this, I think maybe some of you have seen it, but a lot of times if you have like footwear that's really sort of has like a narrower toe box, that's going to create like a squished toe, like squished toes, and that's going to create a lot, like it's going to turn off a lot of the musculature in and around the toes, and it's going to create a lot more tension on the bottom of the foot. Because essentially what plantar fasciitis is like, it's that tissue is just getting sort of overused. And so when you wear a sort of more unnatural shoe, something that has a narrower toe box, that's going to basically facilitate, it's going to keep a lot of that tension on the bottom of the foot, because you're not allowing those muscles in and around the toes to really align and articulate and to sort of take some of that stress off of that plantar fascia. So that's something that we can do real quick. If you guys want to do this, with me, is take a look at your foot and see. I'll just angle the camera down. I actually have my my toe spacers on right now, which is just a tool to allow for that proper alignment. But really that fascia is connecting here and it's splaying out to the 5 toes. So if our toes look like, they're really bunched up like this, that's just going to create a lot more tension and put a lot more stress into that fascia. So take a look at your toes right now and see. I'm going to take these off real quick. See if you can splay your toes. See what your capacity is, if you can sort of open up and have space in between those toes, because that's a really, really important function of the foot, to allow all these muscles to function properly, to again offload some of that sort of stress on the bottom of that plantar fascia. So that's something that you can do quickly here. If you have any questions, maybe I'll just open it up real quick to, I guess, is everybody having the ability to splay the toes? Can you get some toe splay?
See if you can move your toes individually. See if
Yeah.
No.
No, I know.
Not
Like in groups of
individually, but they are apart. There's a separation in between, but I cannot move them like individually.
Nick, have them do the human toe spreader.
Yeah, so this is a really good drill. So this is going to be a little uncomfortable for some of you, but let's give it a shot. So we're going to basically try to interlace our fingers in between our toes. So we're going to take our pinky, we're going to go in between the pinky and the 4th toe, and then we're going to go and we're going to thread our fingers in between our toes. So just getting into this position, see how this feels. And then once you're here, you can kind of move the foot around a little bit. Now, for me, this is not very comfortable, but I can get here. I don't know if for some of you, you might not be able to get the fingers in between the toes.
Try. Still try.
Yeah, give it a shot. Anybody?
Yeah. Got it.
1 to
Yeah,
10, how does it feel? Like 10 being extremely painful, 1 being a nothing.
No, like a 1. Nothing. It's easy for me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
mine's like a 1 too.
Get your fingers all the way down in between the toes like that. Okay, now squeeze and release and see if you can feel that. It should feel good.
Yeah.
Like take your fingers away from your toes.
Yeah, like pulse.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, so try to almost like extend, pull your toes up, and then pull your toes down. Right, so again, this isn't going to feel very comfortable, but the idea here is just getting some mobility into some of those sort of small joints in between the toes. You have over 33 joints in your feet and 26 bones. So your foot is made to move. And so a lot of times when we have these like stiffness or immobile toes, especially the big toe, that just creates, again, a lot more stress into that plantar fascia. So again, high level, like the plantar fascia, a lot of times is just getting overworked because a lot of these other areas, the toes, the big toe, is just not sort of doing its job. And so that plantar fascia is getting overloaded. The other big thing to look at is the arch. And so if you do have more of like a flatter foot where this arch is like collapsed in. So for me, I have more of like a supinated sort of stiff, like high arch. And it's not that one is better than the other, but if you do have a flatter foot, like a collapsed arch, again, that's just kind of weakness in those muscles, in that sort of like your intrinsic core muscles of the foot. And again, same idea. It's just the plantar fascia is just getting overloaded because those muscles are weak and turned off. And so, I think returning to our previous point, it's like you might have some pain and irritation of the tissue. So we need to sort of address that first. But understanding sort of like toe splay and arch shape. And if you do have a flat foot, like there are some exercises that we can give you that will basically start to better develop your foot, your arch, and that will long term take a lot of stress off of that fascia. So
One thing. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
yeah, no, good, go.
No, I was just going to add that one thing to say when it comes to the arches of our feet and flat foot versus high arch is to remember that, like what Nick was saying, is that you have 33 joints in each of your feet and 4 layers of muscle, and you have all those tendons and bones and structures in there that are designed to move. So the foot is designed to be not only a rigid push-off lever or lever, but it's also designed to be mobile and supple and move depending on whatever surfaces we're moving on. So if there a joint comes together in our body, 2 bones coming together with structures that make it move, that means it's designed to move. So if you think about the idea that a quarter of your bones in your body are in your feet, there's a lot of sliding and gliding and manipulation that the foot is designed to do. So the reason why I'm saying that is that pronation or flat feet or high arches are not like a fixed idea. Your foot will move through pronation and supination depending on the inputs that you're giving it. So it comes back to the SAID principle. So be careful that you don't get stuck in your brain that you have like a flat foot that's problematic. None of these are necessary. All of our feet look different and they react different to the inputs that we give them, but you're always able to change the nature of what's happening in your feet, no matter the age, right? So we have a tendency to think like, I'm getting older, this is happening in my body, this is happening in my feet.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think like, especially the flat foot thing, I've been, people have told me, oh, I have flat feet, it's genetic, there's nothing I can do about it. And really, that's just a myth. That's not true. Now, you might have modeled the way that your parents or your environment was when you developed as a child, and you might have modeled the way that they walked, and that maybe was more of like a flatter foot. But you can absolutely build your arch by doing specific exercises. And if you look at, there's a couple cool videos that I've seen of like elite runners. When they run, they land and then their foot completely sort of collapses in, and they have the ability to sort of have that strong mobile foot, because that pronation when they land is actually kind of like a shock absorber. So the goal really is to have a foot that can both sort of supinate, which is like kind of get strong on the outside of the foot, and pronate, which is kind of roll in. So our goal here is just to like take a look and see if you have a really flat foot or a really supinated foot, and then address that with some specific exercises that we'll probably talk about that will kind of give you guys for homework based on your assessment. But I think a cool sort of master test is to just look at your balance and try to get like a 60-second single leg balance hold with your eyes closed, right? So just standing up, stand on one leg, close your eyes, and try to hold that for 60 seconds. And if you can do that, to me, that means that you have pretty good sort of like foot strength, stability, control. And so again, if you can't do that, I would just, close your eyes 60 seconds and see how many times you need to touch your foot down as like an error, and then sort of, track that over time. But the gold standard really is to get 60 seconds without making an error on both legs.
3 times.
3 times.
That's for
So,
consistency.
yeah, exactly. And then, from there, there's all these other cool balance training tools that we'll talk about in later videos. But really the first step with plantar fasciitis or Achilles tendonitis, any kind of like foot pain is sort of assessing your foot to see, what's going on with the foot shape, what's going on with the arch, seeing where you're kind of stiff or weak, and addressing that. And over time, like Ruth was saying, if you can just do things that are playful and fun, and that's where like balance beams come in, or just, doing some basic balance work with like a towel, or just, without any equipment, doing that a couple minutes a day will really start to sort of recalibrate your foot and turn on some of that musculature that might be turned off, and sort of rebalance that foot. So,
One last
yeah.
thing I wanted to say about regarding what Heather was saying is that in addition to what Nick is suggesting, that you take a look at like assessing your feet, assessing your shoes, because your foot's going to adapt the shape of the shoe that you wear. And usually that's going to crunch your toes together. They're not going to get the muscle activity that they need to get the blood flow and all the strength built into the foot. And then the other thing is that if you can start to build your capacity for going barefoot a little bit at a time. So a long-term mindset is important, and building tiny habits are important. So let's say you wear a nicely cushioned shoe for most of your day and playing tennis. A good start would be like, how does it feel, especially if you have plantar fasciitis, like for somebody like you, Martin, how does it feel to be barefoot for 10 minutes a day walking around your house? And then building the capacity slowly, using pain as an indicator, building your barefoot capacity. Now, I'm saying this not knowing like your background. Maybe you're not a beginner in like your barefoot journey, and you can already do that. But it's building capacity barefoot, and then eventually maybe getting a pair of natural shoes to go out into the world in, and then building your strength and capacity, your balance training, and your hips.
Yeah.
So a couple questions. So I just did the balancing, and I could do 45 seconds on one foot and about 40 seconds on the other foot. I do actually walk barefoot around the house quite a bit. I guess my question is, what is your take on flip-flops? And I don't mean like Hawaiianas, those worthless pieces of rubber, but like a good quality flip-flop, like a Chaco that's got how do you really feel, Nick?
Tell me how you really feel. Keep going. Yeah, I think so one of the 5 components of like good footwear, and we'll probably spend a whole nother call on this because it's so important. But one of the components is that it's fixed, and so the heel is fixed. So with a sandal, with a flip-flop that doesn't have, even a high quality sandal flip-flop that doesn't have a back, basically you're having to like crunch your toes with every step you take. And that, I know for me, living in Costa Rica the first 7 years, all I would wear is flip-flops. And if you think about what happens is like every step you're taking, you're literally curling your toes. If you've ever tried to run in flip-flops, it's a pretty good sort of like testament that like it's not natural, because you can't really run in flip-flops because you're having to grip the toes, right? So you want your toes to be lengthened and long and pressing off with each step. So flip-flops definitely a no-no. I have sandals, but they have a back. So if you have something that's fixed where you're not having to grip the toes to propel your foot, that's the big piece. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. I actually thought that having your toes work like that is beneficial, because they're not getting constrained inside the toe of a shoe. they're having to work, they're getting exercise. But look, I know nothing. I mean, that's why I'm here.
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you're-
yeah. No, go ahead, Ruth.
When your toes, when you're flexing your toes to keep the flip-flop on, you're doing the opposite of what your gait cycle wants to do naturally. So when your big toe especially should be coming up, it's pressing down.
Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to say about the Chacos is that those have pretty cushy arch support. So, and I know we're kind of probably digging in a little deeper, but these are important questions that we will unpack and future calls as well. But like that arch support that you get from that Chaco, which I've worn those before, they're so comfortable. But if you think of like the engineering of a bridge, the cushion in the Chaco is doing the work that your foot should be doing.
Got it.
So that means that in addition to your big toe especially, but all the toes doing the opposite of what they would be doing when you would be naturally walking barefoot or in a natural shoe or in any shoe.
Right.
You're doing the opposite, and then you're getting that extra like orthotic effect, which is actually over time makes a weaker, stiffer foot.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Because I think, right, I mean, just quickly on orthotics, I think there's room for orthotics short term if there's like an injury or you need to sort of rehab a foot into proper alignment. But long term, understanding what an orthotic is doing is really offloading the work of the muscles into the orthotic. So you're not really building long-term capacity or resilience in your foot. It would be like if you're wearing, if you wore a cast or a brace, like, as a t-shirt or a piece of clothing, like you don't want that restriction. You want the foot to do, you want to train the muscles and the joints of the foot to do their job. So yeah, maybe let's talk.
Are you guys both proponents then of being barefoot as much as you can then? Is there a solution? Is there a shoe solution, or are you suggesting go barefoot?
Yeah, I mean, we can both answer that. My take would be 100% barefoot is definitely the solution, so long as you have the capacity in the foot. Now, when we're talking about playing tennis, obviously, like, so I would view like any sneaker as like a performance enhancing tool. So like, I'm going to be able to like stop a little bit faster if I have some cushioning, especially on playing on concrete. So like, I want to wear a shoe, when I'm playing certain sports. But for overall sort of walking around the house, for general hiking, you want to wear a more minimal natural shoe. So just having the shoe there protect you from cuts and scrapes, but allowing for a wider toe box, something that's flatter, that's thinner. And we'll have our whole next call maybe on the specifics on shoes, because it is that important.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I mean, barefoot for sure, but you got to be careful, like we were saying earlier. If you've been spending 4 decades in cushioned shoes, there's probably a lot of sort of weakness in the foot that if you go barefoot, it might be just too much too soon.
And that's why we talk about using pain as an indicator or a signal for a need to change, right? So I probably am at the end of the spectrum of like barefoot proponents. And I love being barefoot, and it's been the one thing I think that's helping to heal my knee injuries and my low back issues, is just getting strong, mobile, resilient feet and hips, because you can't have a foot conversation without addressing the hips, which we'll unpack in future calls as well. But I too am, I definitely don't think that I personally don't think people should just be playing tennis barefoot at all. But I do think like outside of the tennis court and like what we're doing, like Nick was talking about, performance enhancing tools, like having a good racket and a nice pair of shoes that work for you are going to be great. But anything outside the tennis court, I think like getting into natural shoes, working and playing in a playful way, because I am in my 50s and I just don't want to be like in the gym anymore than I have to be, like doing the work. I just spent too much time as a kid And so now I want to do the fun stuff. So I spend time at home, balance training, working on my feet, doing whole body fun things like, you know, all kinds of natural movement. Like anytime you can get your whole body involved, it's going to be a better thing for the distal limbs, and building strength from the inside outward. But I definitely agree with Nick, like getting barefoot and pain-free, building small habits, and then using your tools accordingly on the court. What I have found is as I do that, and I started playing tennis in natural footwear and very minimal kind of shoes. So I'm a little bit of an outlier when it comes to that. And I can't play in like a regular cushioned shoe or arch support shoe or narrow shoe, because it irritates a Baker cyst that I have on the back of my knee. So I have to feel the ground and have all those sensory feedback.
Cool.
Nice. Awesome, Ruth. Okay, you want to talk? I just want to be mindful of time. We have about 20 minutes, and so maybe
Before we go on, did anybody else have questions for us about like plantar fasciitis specifically? Otherwise, we'll go on to tennis elbow, which is another aspect of injury and tension patterns. Good to go. Okay, so before we start on the specifics of tennis elbow, I just want to say the solutions are going to be very similar for anything upper body. It's all going to be sound the same after a while. You're going to have pattern recognition that it's always going to be about if you're dealing with an acute injury or chronic injury, like something that happens in the elbow. So tennis elbow is affected by the outside or the extensor part of our forearm and then around the elbow. But this upper limb is really not that much different from our lower limb. So all that stuff that Nick said about how to get yourself out of pain and taking it slow, all of those processes are going to be the same when it comes to something like tennis elbow. So just like really quick, high level, layman terms, I'm just going to tell you about what tennis elbow is if you don't already know. So it's called lateral epicondylitis. So it affects the outside of the extensor part of our forearm, and then around where the two bones of the forearm meet the upper bone of the arm, right? And we get increasingly sensitive signals in the elbow. So it can be super frustrating, just like plantar fasciitis. It's the same kind of pain. There's like a really big sheet of fascia in between the two bones of the forearm. And it kind of acts in a similar way as kind of like what the big tendons and ligaments of the lower limb are to our upper body, or our forearm. So all of that overloading the tissues here, and the repetitive motion of that starts to increase the pain signal in the elbow, giving us the pain signal to change what we're doing. It's usually overuse, like repetitive overuse without having the capacity to do that, or overloading maybe with like a too heavy of a tennis racket, or the mechanics of how you're swinging. But regardless of the why, because we don't know it's why necessarily for each individual, the processes are the same. Get yourself out of pain and take your time by being gentle. Usually it's with like a massage, like Nick showed you with the plantar fascia. It's the same thing in the outer portion of the elbow, is you want to gently massage. And I have a video about this too that we'll post, but you essentially are going to massage with some lotion or something that glides in the direction of the heart is usually best, because it helps to facilitate circulation. And I usually like to do some squeezing with the hand, and then not overstimulating the pain response. Once you are at a level of like 3 or 4 out of 10, then you start working to bring more flexibility to the area. And then once you feel, and so always using like pain as I like how Nick says, like your wise teacher. So that means not being, having your pain signals suppressed with Advil, ibuprofen, or whatever you're using, because you want to have the information from pain. And that's always going to be your teacher. that change is needed. And I think the thing that's just really important to come back to is we never are getting the results that we want fast enough, which is why we start taking pain medicine or trying to go to the next shiny thing. So building small habits, like you can get out of pain in your tennis elbow by resting, massaging, using the lacrosse ball or a cork ball and pressing into the area like a gentle massage, like a masseuse would give you or a masseur would give you in that area. By doing that for yourself every day for a period of time, we don't do that for ourselves, right? And then little by little starting to build the capacity in that area. And so rather than showing you, I'll link the video, but we're going to start to be using the muscles of the back of the extensors in ways that will start to build the capacity and the strength in that area, supinating and pronating this wrist with extra load, but without pain. So there'll be like exercises to do that are simple, and you don't have to go to the gym, and you don't have to do a ton of extra work. You just do it a few times a day. Well, maybe you're watching a show or listening to music or waiting for your coffee to brew. You can do these little practices that will yield big benefits. And the last thing I want to say about tennis elbow and any other tension pattern or injuries that we're experiencing is that when we don't get the results that we want as quickly as we want, we tend to want to go to the next shiny thing that's going to fix it. And I always encourage people to reel back in, because all of these conditions have very simple fixes, but we tend to steer away too soon from them because it doesn't seem like something that simple could be helpful in the long run. So we either want to go get an MRI or we want to like do all the things. And I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't do that, but I'm saying that like it's usually a distraction from doing the small practices each and every day consistently. Yeah, so I think that gives like a little bit of insight about that, and then I'll just open it up to you for questions if you have them.
Yeah, that's awesome, Ruth. I just want to add one thing, and I don't know if I said it with the foot stuff as well, but a really important question to ask yourself is like, have you been doing more than like normal over the last like few days or weeks? Because a lot of like tennis elbow plantar fasciitis is just sort of like a short-term, like you're just doing too much, too soon. Like I had the guy I played paddle with yesterday, he played tennis later in the day, and then he played like pickleball at night. And he's like, man, my elbow's killing me. And I'm like, yeah, because you played like 6 hours of racket sports and you're used to probably playing, 2 hours a week or whatever it is. So like anytime you increase the intensity or the frequency, it could just be like a recovery thing that you just need to lay off for a few days. And I think with all of us here, we're really trying to take the long-term approach, right? If we want to be able to play this beautiful sport for decades and decades to come, it might mean maybe taking a few days off or taking a couple weeks off. But that doesn't mean like doing nothing. I mean, as Ruth was saying, there's plenty of sort of movements and exercises that we're going to show you that you can do as long as it's pain-free, that will start to sort of build the capacity so that this stuff doesn't return. But it's always a good question to ask yourself, like, have you been doing a lot more than you normally do? And it might just be as simple that those tissues are just slightly overloaded. And then the other thing is I think it's really important. I don't think we've talked about this yet, Ruth, like the idea of being your own sort of like scientist and taking some notes, because, something like for you, Martin, with the plantar fasciitis, like some days it might be a 2, other days it might be an 8. And when you start to take notes around like how frequent is the pain, how intense is the pain, you can start to sort of build and sort of connect some dots around maybe certain activities of what you're doing or not doing, and how that's either contributing to making it worse or contributing to making it better. But a lot of times if we're not recording it, we just don't know, right? But if your pain is going from a 5, 6, 7 out of 10 down to like a 2 or 3 out of 10, to me that means you're doing something, like it's going in the right direction. You just need to keep going, right? But a lot of times we just don't sort of take those notes, and so we're just sort of flying by the seat of our pants. So it's important to just sort of get a few measurements around just subjectively how you're feeling, pain,
Yeah.
frequency, and intensity.
Yeah, the note taking that's brilliant. Like the proof, like the just kind of like the pattern recognition, that's really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Orne, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was thinking, like when you're increasing the amount of times you play a week or something, if there's also like a warm up you can do to avoid, of course there is, but in tennis elbow specifically, well, I didn't feel that pain, but I did feel the pain here, and I noticed that sometimes if I go to a clinic or maybe I arrive late and they start like hitting harder, and it's not good. So I need to do a little warm up first, and that helps, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think Ruth, what we'll probably do is we'll probably shoot a couple of videos on like a specific tennis warm up that'll hit everything. But I think just to answer your question, I would say, wrist circles, shoulder circles. I mean, really the goal of the warm up is to like increase your body temperature and to get blood flow into your tissues. I mean, fortunately, like here in Costa Rica, it's really warm out. So our body temps are already warm. What Ruth's doing there is like what's called a controlled articulation, like a controlled articular rotation, where you're trying to just get all the ranges of motion into that shoulder joint.
You keep your chest forward as much as possible. This is a great warm up.
Yeah. And then notice where you might have, like, for some people, when you get to this like top position, maybe there's some pain, or you get out here and just kind of be notice like where that pain is, and try to just do whatever is like pain-free movement, I think is a good sort of guide. But yeah, I mean, warming up is really, really important. And then we'll probably talk about range of motion too. Like if you don't have range of motion in your wrist, that could create a lot of tennis elbow or shoulders too. So we'll probably get into that in other videos.
I mean, like tennis, we don't really talk about specifics that much, but I noticed that with tennis elbow and anything with my shoulder and my neck is usually because I'm not getting to the ball, like I'm hitting the ball late and I'm pulling through with so much extra force from the limb rather than being, so sometimes, and you mentioned like when the ball is getting hit harder at you, if we're not getting to the ball and in the right place, we tend to overuse the neck and the shoulder and the arm rather than using the whole unit turn. So that's one thing, just mechanic wise, I noticed personally, like once I did a little bit more footwork and fitness work, I'm able to get to the ball and my timing is better so that I'm coming through and hitting the ball when it's in front of me. Like I'm using the kinetic chain better, or I guess is what I'm saying. But I don't go to the tennis court without doing this shoulder. And I do like maybe 4 circles forwards, 4 circles backwards, a couple times on each side. And I noticed that I don't have as much of that like neck nervy kind of shoulder pain. So I don't know if that might be helpful. Before we went on, I wanted to address the experiment like you did with single leg balance for upper body. So one of the standards that you can start working on is going to a pull-up bar or in your gym on the squat bar and working towards a 30-second dead hang. So the limiting capacity to start will probably be the skin on our hands, but the more that we have the hanging capacity in our bodies to hold our body weight up, you start to build the capacity and strength in the neck and the shoulders and so on down to the distal ends of the fingertips. And that's a good assessment as well. So Nick, you had some actual, I think some numbers, but building up to 30 seconds and up to a minute of a hanging, a dead hang would be.
Yeah, I think, the standards that I like for men, like getting up to a 90-second dead hang is a pretty solid standard to shoot for, and for women probably getting up to 60 seconds.
No banana backs, so a nice little hold so you don't let your back arch.
Yeah, and the beauty with like, it can be an assessment, the hanging, and it also can be just an exercise you do. Because like Ruth was saying, when you hang, it's kind of similar to the balance for the lower body health. When you're just standing on one foot and you're balancing, especially without your visual field to kind of help, you're sort of having to fire all the muscles in and around your foot and lower leg to sort of recalibrate. And it's the same thing when you hang. You're sort of, your body is trying to sort of figure out how to you know, keep your body from sort of arching and rounding, and it can be really good for your shoulder stability. And a lot of shoulder pain and shoulder issues can actually just go away from a daily routine of hanging. It can be really that powerful. And so yeah, grip strength is going to be a limiter, and you might just not have the capacity in your shoulders as well. So then you could find a box or a step or a chair, and you could kind of offload some of your weight onto the ground or a chair if you don't want to, if you can't hang fully. But just allowing that sort of like arm to lengthen out. You're also getting some good decompression of the spine, which sort of like traction of the spine, which can be really helpful because most of us are sitting and our spines are sort of compressed. So it allows for a little bit of space to open up in between those vertebrae. So hanging and balance are like, you know, if you do nothing else and you just do those two things, you're going to get a huge amount of benefits. Those are two huge levers to pull. One for your body and lower
I know it's a given, but the balance is barefoot. The balance standard that Nick gave you is barefoot. I think you said that, but I just wanted to reiterate that, not in your tennis shoe, in like just barefoot.
Yeah, that's a great, yeah, because I have some clients that I train and we'll do some single leg work, and they'll have a cushiony Hoka or you know, Nike, and we'll do a bunch of lunge work, and then we'll do it barefoot, and the amount of like balance and stability they have barefoot is so much better than with the shoe. So you definitely want to move towards you know, doing all this stuff barefoot, and just be mindful if you do have some weakness or stiffness in the foot, you know, just build over time. But for sure, for the assessment, just trying to keep it as, you know, consistent as possible in terms of the same surface. Because there are some surfaces, even a mat, like if you do it on a yoga mat, or I have some like cushiony mats here, that can add a little bit of actual instability. So doing it on a hard floor, or just being consistent with the surface that you do the balance assessment, because that'll just keep everything nice and standard.
Sorry, for the balance with your feet, it's just like lifting one of your feet and the other one on the floor, or you have to do something with the hands, or just like straight?
Yeah, there's no rules. The only rule is that your eyes are closed. You can let your arms, your whole body is going to move to adjust. You just lift one foot off the ground, and then you close your eyes, you set a timer, and then an error is how many times do you touch the ground or open your eyes. Those are considered to be errors. And like Nick was saying, it's an assessment. Yes, it's something to build towards, but it's an amazing, it's fun, and it's an amazing exercise too. But don't have to worry about keeping your arms still. As you start to build your capacity, and like Martin was saying, he could do 40 seconds or something. Like when you get up to 60 seconds, you can do things like starting to take your arms completely out of it. So they're like just tiny little movements or lack of movements, or turning your head. You can open your eyes and like practice turning your head or looking up, standing on one foot, but building the balance capacity that way. There's lots of fun things you can do to make it interesting and also work towards that functional capacity.
Awesome. Any other questions, guys, or we'll just sort of wrap it up here? If not.
Thank you both for your time. I really appreciate it and enjoyed the hour. Thank you.
Cool, you got it, Martin. Yeah, so we'll
Yes,
we'll be emailing with some exercises, some of the standards that we talked about. You know, again, our high level goal, I think, yeah, Heather, you were on the last call, but Martin, Orne, we're just trying to build a community here. We're going to probably be sort of developing a few courses and digital programs and products, and trying to really build a community of healthy tennis pain-free players. So that's what our plan is. We'll be having these calls every few weeks. And then, you know, in a few months, we'll probably be dropping some sort of digital programs and courses that you guys could join us on. But for now, yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for showing up and sharing your energy. And Ruth, any
question? No, just, yeah, I second what Nick said, just, and also if you have feedback or things that you want us, we're trying to get information about what could be helpful to our communities so that when we build a systematic approach to helping people, that we actually have something that people could use and need. So anything that you have interest in or questions about, please feel free to reach out.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
guys.
guys.
All right, guys.
Appreciate it.
Take care. Have a beautiful day. We'll talk to you guys soon.
You too.
Thank you for coming.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And we're gonna stop the recording.